The iron collar bit cold into her throat. Snow drifted across the courtyard. Hundreds of wolves watched in human skin, their breath steaming in the dark. And the man who was born to love her, the man the moon herself had chosen, turned his back. He sank his teeth into another woman's neck. Ren felt the bond tear, felt her own soul split down the middle like a seam pulled too hard. She did not scream for him. She did not beg. She had stopped begging the day he called her a witch and dragged her down into the ash. But here is the thing about a girl thrown into the dirt. Sometimes the dirt remembers her. Sometimes the moon does too. Because the alpha who chained his fated mate to marry her cruel sister was about to learn a slow and terrible truth. You cannot spit in the face of something divine and keep your crown. The land will rot, the bloodline will wither, and the broken girl kneeling in the snow, the one with no name, no dowry, no single soul to speak for her, she will rise, and one day the king who enslaved her will crawl through the mud, just to kneel at her feet. Watch what she does when he gets there. The ash never stopped falling. It drifted down from the great hearths far above, soft and gray, settling in her hair, on her shoulders, on the backs of her ruined hands. Ren knelt on the cold stone in the lowest room of the keep, the place where dead fires came to be forgotten. Her fingers moved across the belly of an iron pot in slow, aching circles. The skin had split there long ago. It bled a little. Then it stopped. Then it bled again. She had taught herself not to notice. She had a name. Almost no one used it. To the kitchens, she was the girl in the corner. To the great house above, she was the thing the Lord wished he could forget. A mistake wearing a servant's body. A secret with a heartbeat. And to herself, on the coldest nights, she was simply this. Tired, not bitter. Bitterness took strength, and strength was the one thing she could not spare. The cold down here had a smell all its own. Wet stone and old smoke and the faint mineral tang of the iron she scrubbed until her arms shook. She had lived inside that smell so long she no longer knew where it ended and where she began. So she did not understand at first why the air changed. It came down the narrow stair like a current moving through still water. Pine, cold rain on rock, and underneath it, something wild and low and warm, something that made the fine hairs along her arms stand up. Ren went very still. The pot slipped half an inch in her grip. Far above her, in the great hall, a man had just gone still as well. Alaric Vale had ridden 2 days through a wind that cut like wire. His pack was starving. The long dark of winter had come early to his lands. The granaries were thin, and his people looked to him with hollow eyes and far too much faith. So he had come here, to this old house with its fat fields and its proud daughter, to make a marriage that would feed 1,000 mouths. He did not believe in soft things. He believed in grain and walls and the cold arithmetic of survival. The Lord's daughter had curtsied low when he entered. Sloan, hair like winter sunlight, a smile built for thrones. She was exactly what an alliance required. Beautiful the way a blade is beautiful. Useful. His wolf had not stirred for her. His wolf had not stirred in years. And then, somewhere beneath his boots, down in the bones of the house, something reached up and took him by the throat. A scent, wild jasmine, crushed and green and impossibly sweet. the clean electric shock of a storm about to break. It went through him like a blade sliding home. His wolf, that silent sleeping thing, came awake all at once, with a sound like a held breath finally let go. Mate. One word. Older than language. He was already moving before he chose to. Down the wide stair, then the narrow one, past startled servants who pressed themselves flat to the walls. The scent pulled him like a hook set deep behind the ribs. He did not slow. He could not. He threw open a low door, and the cold and the ash came rolling out to meet him. And there she was. She was kneeling. That was the first thing he saw, and it struck him in a place he had no words for. A girl in rags too thin for the cold, ash in her dark hair, an iron pot abandoned at her side. She lifted her face, and the whole rotten, freezing world went silent. For Wren, it felt as though a second heart had begun to beat inside her chest. She looked up at the man filling the doorway, and the bond snapped shut between them with the force of a door slammed in a gale. She felt it everywhere, in her teeth, in her spine, in the cracked skin of her hands, which suddenly did not hurt. He was tall and broad in the shoulder, his eyes the pale gray of river ice. Frost still clung to the dark fur at his collar. He looked at her the way a drowning man looks at the shore. And for one foolish, shining heartbeat, Wren let herself hope. She did not know his rank. She did not know his name. She only knew the pull between them was real and ancient, and that it had a name in the old stories her mother used to tell. The moon's own choosing, the other half of a soul. A small broken thing in her chest began, very carefully, to unfold. Her lips moved. Almost a smile. Then she watched it die in his face. Alaric had taken a single step toward her. Only one. And then the room sharpened around the warmth flooding his blood. The rags. The ash. The freezing corner where the lowest of the low were sent to disappear. He understood what she was. Not her name. Her place. The Lord's shame. The bastard born to a servant woman and buried in the dark. A girl with no house, no dowry, no standing in any hall that mattered. To claim her was to break the treaty. To claim her was to watch his people starve. His wolf was screaming at him to fall to his knees. His pride, cold and old and stronger than any beast, told him to run. And Alaric Vale, who had survived everything the world threw at him by being harder than all of it, made the worst choice of his long life in the space of a single breath. He went cold. The warmth drained from his eyes until they were the gray of ice over deep water. "Who are you?" he said. It was not a question. It landed like a blow. Wren felt the hope inside her chest fold its wings. "Wren," she whispered. Her voice came rough from the cold and from disuse. "I work in the kitchens, my lord." "A servant." He said the word as though it tasted of rot. She did not understand in that moment what was happening behind those pale eyes. She could not know that he was at war, that every word leaving his mouth was a wound he was choosing to give himself. She only knew that he crossed the room, that his hand closed around her arm and pulled her up, and that it hurt. His grip was iron. His skin was fever warm against hers. And even now, even as he hurt her, the bond sang where they touched. She hated that it sang. "You smell of witchcraft," he said. He said it loudly, loud enough for the footsteps gathering in the corridor to hear. "No," Wren breathed. "My lord." I have no magic. I am only a maid. Silence. His voice filled the little stone room. Behind him, in the doorway, the lord of the house had appeared. Guards crowded at his back, drawn by the noise. They saw the great Alpha holding a trembling girl by the arm. This creature tried to lay a charm on me, Alaric said. Each word cost him something. Not one of them could see it. She means to bewitch me, to poison the alliance. She is crawling through my mind even now. The Lord did not look at her with pity. He looked at her with relief. A problem solved. Take her, my lord, he said. She is nothing. She always was. Inside, where no one could see, Alaric's wolf was tearing itself to pieces. Outside, his face was stone. Then bind her, he said. Not as a bride, as a thrall, chained in iron. She will serve my Luna. She will serve the Lady Sloane. They brought the chains before the hour was out. Cold rusted iron closing around her thin wrists, around her throat. The metal bit into her skin and did not let go. Wren did not cry. That was the thing they all remembered after, the ones who stood in that room. The bastard girl did not weep. She did not beg. She did not look away. She lifted her chin instead. She looked at the man the moon had chosen for her, the man who had just thrown her into the dark, and she held his gaze until he was the one who had to turn away. And as they led her out into the falling snow, something neither of them could name went quiet in the world. Far above, hidden behind the heavy gray of the winter sky, the moon was watching. And the moon does not forget. The fortress rose out of the snow like something the mountain had grown rather than something men had built. Black stone. Towers that climbed up into low cloud and vanished. Walls so cold they seemed to drink the light right out of the day. They called it Veilhold. Wren saw it for the first time through a gap in the slats of a prisoner's wagon, with the iron collar already wearing a raw red ring into the skin of her throat. The journey had taken days. She had counted none of them. Time, like her name, had become a thing that belonged to other people now. She had learned the new shape of her body in that wagon, the places the chains rubbed, the way the cold settled into her joints and stayed, the particular ache of a hunger that no longer expected to be answered, and under all of it, that other ache, the deep one, the one with no name she was willing to say. At the head of the long line rode the Alpha. He never once looked back, but Wren, who had nothing left to do but feel, felt the bond stretch taut between them the whole way. A thread drawn thin across the freezing miles, every turn of the wheels pulled at it. She wondered in the dark whether he felt it too. He felt it. Alaric Vale rode with his spine straight and his face like the stone of his own walls, and inside his chest the bond burned like a coal pressed against bone. Every mile carried her scent forward to him on the wind. Jasmine and storm. It curled into his lungs and would not leave. His wolf had stopped howling. Now it only watched, silent, reproachful. A weight behind his ribs that judged him with every breath. He told himself he had done what a leader must. He did not yet understand that some choices keep on costing you long after you think the bill is paid. At the gates, he did the cruelest thing he could think of. He did it on purpose. He took the length of chain that bound her, and he placed it into the soft, ringed hand of Sloane. "She is yours to command," he said. "Do with her as you see fit." And then he walked away before the look on the bastard girl's face could undo him. Sloane smiled. Wren had seen that smile before, from across courtyards, from the far end of long tables where she was never allowed to sit. It was the smile of a woman who had wanted something for a very long time, and had finally been handed it, gift-wrapped. "Well," Sloane said softly, testing the weight of the chain, "look how far you have climbed, sister." She said the word like a blade slid between two ribs. They gave Wren a cell, not a room, a cell, a narrow box of stone set into the wall just beyond the royal chambers, close enough that she could hear silk rustle and fires crackle and laughter she would never be part of. They took her rags and gave her burlap, coarse and gray and heavy, the uniform of the lowest thrall in the house. The collar stayed. It rested cold against her collarbone, day and night, a constant whisper against her skin. "You are nothing. You belong to no one. You were chosen, and then you were thrown away." But here is what the collar could not do. It could not reach inside her and turn out the small, steady light that had always lived there, even in the ash. The thing her mother had given her, long before the world taught her what she was supposed to be. A simple, stubborn certainty that a person is not made small by the smallness of how she is treated. The wedding swallowed the whole fortress. Banners, feasts planned, the endless coming and going of seamstresses and stewards and pack elders with grain ledgers tucked under their arms. And in the middle of it, the gown. It was to be the most beautiful thing the territory had ever seen. White silk, soft as falling snow. Thousands of tiny freshwater pearls, each one to be sewn on by hand. By her hand. Sloane made certain of that. "My sister has such clever fingers," she announced to the seamstresses with a laugh like breaking glass. "Let her be useful for once in her wretched life." So Wren sat, night after night, in a cold corridor lit by a single guttering candle. She bent over an ocean of white silk and sewed. The needle was small. Her hands were stiff with cold. The chain at her wrists clinked with every stitch, a thin metallic counting of the hours. The pearl slipped. The needle slipped. It found her fingertips again and again, and the blood welled up, bright and warm. But she never let a single drop touch the silk. Think about that. A girl with a collar on her throat, sewing the wedding gown of the woman who had stolen her life, bleeding into the freezing dark. And still she held her own ruined hands away from the white, so the gown would stay perfect. Not for Sloane. For herself? Because there was one thing in that whole fortress that could still be clean, and she would not be the one to spoil it. The bond did not weaken with distance. It did the opposite. A mate bond is a living thing. To deny it is to deny gravity, and gravity always collects what it is owed. Whenever Alaric came near, the air grew thick. Wren would feel it before she saw him. The hair lifting on her arms, the warmth blooming low in her belly that she despised herself for. The scent of pine and cold rain sliding under the stone door of wherever she was kept. Her body remembered him even when her pride refused. And he was no better. He held a court with Sloane at his side, and the bond screaming in his chest the whole time. He could smell the blood on Wren's fingers from across the hall, and it drove his wolf half mad. There were nights he did not sleep at all. There were nights he stood at the window of his cold chamber and stared at the moon and hated it for choosing her, for choosing him, for making this beautiful, unbearable thing and then letting him ruin it. The night it broke open, the great hall was nearly empty. Just the three of them, Sloane inspecting silver for the feast, Alaric on his black throne, a king of a kingdom he had bought with someone else's soul, and Wren, on the cold stone by the hearth, feeding the fire because she had been told to. "Thrall," Sloane snapped, not bothering to look up. "Whine, and do not drag your feet, you clumsy creature." Wren rose. Her knees ached from the stone. Her arms shook, lifting the heavy silver pitcher. The chain clinked in the great quiet room. She crossed toward the dais, and her foot caught the edge of a heavy woven rug. She fell. The pitcher left her hands. It struck the floor with a clang that rang off the high ceiling, and dark wine bloomed across the hem of Sloane's gown like a spreading wound. For one breath, the hall was silent. Then Sloane shrieked. It was a sound of pure, naked rage. She drew back her ringed hand. The heavy stones turned outward, ready to lay Wren's cheek open to the bone. Wren saw it coming. She had been struck before. She closed her eyes and waited for it, the way the small and the powerless learn to wait. The blow never landed, because the hall shook. A growl rolled out of the dark, low and enormous, a sound that came up through the floor and into the chest of everyone in the room. It was not a human sound. It belonged to something far older and far more dangerous, and Alaric was simply there. He had crossed the entire hall faster than the eye could follow. His hand closed around Sloane's wrist like a trap snapping shut. His eyes had changed. The pale gray was gone. In its place burned the molten gold of his wolf, full and feral and blazing. "Do not," he said. The words came layered, two voices at once, the man and the beast speaking together. "Do not touch her." Sloane went white. She had never seen him like this. None of them had. The cold lord of Vale Hold had vanished, and in his place stood something that wanted, very badly, to kill. "She ruined my gown," Sloane whispered. "She is clumsy. She is a useless beast." Alaric looked down. Wren was on the floor at his feet, one arm raised to shield her face, her chained wrists trembling, and the whole of him cracked open. Every instinct he had screamed at him to tear Sloane's throat out for daring to raise a hand, to go down on his knees in the spilled wine and gather the girl into his arms, to break the iron at her wrists with his bare hands and bury his face in the crook of her neck and finally claim what was his. His wolf surged toward the surface, golden and joyful, ready. He wanted her. In that moment, more than grain, more than walls, more than his own life, he wanted her. Then the great oak doors of the hall groaned open. The high council of the pack came filing in, gray heads bent together, voices murmuring of border patrols and grain tariffs and the cost of the coming feast. The world rushed back in like cold water through a cracked hull. The treaty, the crown, the thousand starving mouths that were his to feed, the terrible arithmetic. The gold drained from his eyes. It happened slowly, and Wren watched it happen, and something in her understood that she was watching a door close that would never open again. He released Sloane's wrist. He stepped back. His face settled into stone. "She is property, Sloane," he said. His voice was calm. It sounded dead, even to him. One does not damage valuable property out of temper. Have her taken to the lower cells for the night. No food. That will be lesson enough. Wren lowered her face. She did not cry. She had promised herself she was done with that, somewhere on the long cold road to this place. But something quiet folded shut inside her chest, because now she understood the truth of it all the way down. He was not a man fighting his own cruelty and losing. He was a man who could feel exactly what she was to him, and was choosing, with both hands, every single day, to throw it away. That was so much worse. The guards took her down into the dark. She let them. She did not look back at him. And that, somehow, was the thing that gutted him. That night, Alaric did not sleep. He left the warmth of his chambers and walked down past the torches, down into the cold breath of the lower cells, where the stone wept damp and the dark had a texture you could almost touch. He told himself he did not know why he was going. He was lying. He stopped outside the bars of her cell. She was curled on the stone floor, the burlap pulled tight around her thin frame, the collar dull in the faint light. Her breathing was slow. Asleep, or pretending to be. Even here, even now, her scent reached for him. Jasmine under the damp and the cold. It wrapped around his chest and squeezed. He lifted his hand. He meant to open the door. He told himself he only wanted to look at her, to make sure she was warm enough, that the cold had not taken her in the night. That was a lie, too. He wanted to go in. He wanted to lift her off that freezing floor. He wanted to take the collar in his fist and crush it and tell her the truth, every shameful word of it, that his wolf had known her in an instant, that he had known her, that he had looked at the one good thing the moon had ever offered him, and he had thrown it into the dark to save a harvest. His hand touched the cold iron of the bars. It trembled. And then he took it back. He pressed his fist against his own chest, over the place where the bond burned, and he stood there in the dark like a beggar at a door he did not have the courage to open. He did not go in. He never did. Above the black towers of Valehold, the winter moon hung low and full and patient. It had seen this before. Men who mistake pride for strength. Men who believe a crown can keep them warm. It watched the Alpha turn and walk away from the only fire that could have saved him. And somewhere far beneath the cold stone, in the dark he had sent her to, the girl in the iron collar opened her eyes. She was not asleep. She had felt him there, every second of it, and she made herself a promise, lying on that freezing floor. Whatever she was about to become, it would not be his to throw away again. The day of the wedding came wrapped in a blizzard. Snow fell in thick, silent sheets, swallowing the towers, swallowing the road, swallowing every sound, until the whole world seemed to be holding one long breath. It did not feel like a celebration. It felt like the sky itself was trying to bury something before anyone could see what it was. They dressed Sloane in the gown, the white silk, soft as new snow, the 1,000 pearls, each one stitched into place across the long hours of freezing nights, set there by hands that were now hidden inside heavy iron and rough gray cloth. Wren stood behind her. That was her place in this. Not a guest, not a sister, A pair of hands, nothing more. Hands to carry the long pearl-heavy train across the frozen courtyard so the silk would not drag in the snow. The collar at her throat had gone so cold it had begun to burn. She had not eaten in 2 days. The cell had taken its toll. Her cheeks had hollowed. Her wrists, where the iron sat, had worn down to a raw and weeping red. But she stood straight. She did not know how to do otherwise anymore. Somewhere in the long descent of these weeks, standing straight had become the last thing that was hers, and she held on to it the way a drowning woman holds a rope. The whole pack had gathered, thousands of them, standing in human skin beneath the wide black sky, their breath rising in pale clouds that drifted up and vanished. They had come to see their Alpha take a Luna, to see the Great Alliance sealed, to watch the long winter beaten back by grain and gold and the joining of 2 proud houses. Not one of them looked at the girl holding the train. Why would they? She was a tool, a piece of the furniture of someone else's grand day, a thing the Lord had thrown away, and a thing thrown away does not get looked at. But Wren looked at him. She could not stop herself. The bond would not let her. Alaric stood at the head of the courtyard in the dark firs of his house, tall and unmoving, his jaw set hard as the black stone of his walls. The full moon had torn a clean hole in the clouds, directly above him, and its light came pouring down. Cold, silver, merciless. He did not look back at her, not once. He kept his pale eyes fixed forward, on the priest, on the woman in white, on anything in the whole frozen world, except the girl the moon had made for him, and the bond between them, even now, even here, pulled so hard it made the courtyard tilt around her. He felt it too. Of course he did. Every step Sloane took toward him, the thread behind his ribs cried out a single word. Wrong. Wrong woman. Wrong vow. Wrong life. His wolf paced the inside of his skull, frantic now, throwing itself against the iron walls of his will. She is here. She is standing right behind you. Turn around. Turn around, before it is too late. He did not turn around. He had made his choice in an ash room weeks ago, and a man like Alaric Vale did not unmake a choice once it was made. He buried it. He laid stone over it. He built a whole cold fortress on top of it, and he called the burying strength. He was about to learn what it truly was. The old priest lifted his voice into the cold. The words were ancient, older than the house, older than the pack itself. The vows of binding, the joining of 2 souls into one, spoken in the tongue of the first wolves beneath the eye of the moon. He held out a long silver blade. Alaric took it. He drew the edge across his own palm. The blood welled up dark in the silver light. Then he took Sloane's soft white hand and drew it across her palm as well. He pressed the 2 wounds together, blood to blood, and the priest bound their joined hands in a cord of woven silver. "Do you," the priest intoned, "take this female as your Luna, to bind your soul to hers, to set aside all other ties of body and of spirit, before the goddess herself who is watching." The courtyard went utterly silent. Even the snow seemed to pause in the air, as if the storm itself had stopped to listen to the answer. Wren stood behind them, holding the white silk in her ruined hands, and waited for the word that would end the world. She told herself she would feel nothing. She told herself the hope had already died, weeks ago, in the great hall, when the gold drained out of his eyes, and he called her property in front of his council. There was nothing left in her for him to break. She was wrong about that. There is always one more thing left to break. There always is. That is the cruelest law of a feeling heart. I do, Alaric said. The words came out flat, cold, hollow as a struck bell with the metal cracked clean through. They tasted, to him, like ash, like the gray ash of the room where he had first found her, kneeling in the cold. He would taste those 2 words for the rest of his long and unnatural life. Then seal the vow, said the priest. Alaric turned to face Sloane. He took her shoulders in his hands. He leaned down, slow and deliberate, the way a man does a thing he has fully and finally decided to do. The pack watched in reverent, breathless silence, and he sank his lengthening teeth into the soft curve of her neck, into the gland where a true mate's mark is meant to be set, the place that was never, ever meant for her. The world tore. It was not a sound. It was something deeper than sound, something that lived underneath sound. An invisible shock wave ripped outward through the courtyard, through the falling snow, through the thousands of gathered wolves, and it struck Wren full in the center of her chest. She felt the bond, the living thread that had run between her soul and his since the moment their eyes first met in the dark. She felt it sever, not cut, severed, torn. The way a limb is torn from a body that is still alive to feel every fiber of it go. A sound came out of her that no soul in that pack would ever forget. It was not a scream. A scream is a human thing. A scream still believes someone might come. This was lower than that. Older. The raw, splitting cry of a soul being ripped down the middle, with no belief left that anyone would come at all. The white silk slipped from her fingers. Her hands flew to her chest and clutched there, clawing, as if she could hold the 2 halves of herself together by sheer force of will. As if she could keep her own spirit from spilling out across the snow. She convulsed once, then again, and then her knees buckled, and she folded down onto the frozen cobblestones and went terribly, utterly still. The color drained out of her skin from the inside until she lay as pale and as white as the snow she had fallen into. For a long moment she looked dead, a small heap of gray burlap and dark hair, an iron collar gone dull in the moonlight, a girl lying broken at the very edge of someone else's wedding. No one moved to help her. No one even turned to look. The eyes of the whole pack stayed fixed on their alpha and his bleeding new Luna, joined hand to hand, blood to blood, beneath the full silver moon. But Alaric felt her fall. He felt it the way a tree feels the lightning that splits it open. The instant his teeth broke Sloane's skin, a catastrophe tore through his own mind. The bond did not break only for Wren. It broke for him. A forced claiming, a stolen mark, a sacred vow sworn over a lie, the oldest magic that exists, taken and twisted and made to bleed. His wolf threw back its head, and it howled. It was the most desperate sound a living thing can make, a long, mournful, earth-deep cry of pure grief, ringing out through the empty halls of his mind, the sound of something that knows it is dying and knows there is nothing left to be done about it. And then it curled in on itself, It turned its great head away from the man who had betrayed it, and it went silent. Alaric tore his mouth from Sloane's throat, gasping for air. He swayed where he stood. For one wild, blank moment, he did not know where he was, who he was, what he had just done. Then his eyes found her, down in the snow, pale and still and folded small, the girl he had been born to love, lying broken because of a wound he had inflicted with his own 2 hands. He had a Luna now. He had an army. He had grain enough to feed his people through 10 winters and more. And he understood, standing there in the cold silver light, that he had just murdered his own soul to win them. The wedding night was a hollow thing. There was no fire in it, no joy, no fierce and tender union of 2 halves at last made whole. There was only a man moving through the motions of his life, like a ghost wearing his own skin. Sloane lay triumphant in the great bed beside him, a Luna at last. Everything she had ever schemed for, finally hers. And Alaric felt nothing. Where his wolf had always been, that warm and watchful presence at the back of his mind, his oldest companion, the truest part of himself, there was now only a void, a cold, echoing emptiness, a great house with every fire gone out and every door swinging open onto dark. He had been alone in his life before. This was a different thing entirely. This was being alone inside his own body. When Sloane finally slept, he rose. He went out onto the high balcony of his chambers, and he stood in the cutting wind, and he looked up at the sky. The moon hung low over the black towers. It was enormous, far closer than it had any right to be, and it had taken on a strange and sickening color, a deep, bruised purple, the exact shade of a wound spreading just beneath the skin. It was not the face of a goddess pleased with a union sworn beneath her light. It was the face of a goddess who had finished deciding. Alaric stared up at it until the cold drove him back inside. He did not yet understand what he was looking at. He would. In time, he would understand all of it. Far below the warm bed and the high balcony, down in the cold, wet breath of the lower cells, Wren was not dead. Though she lay there wishing, with everything that was left in her, that she were. The fever had come on fast. It burned through her like fire racing through dry grass, and it had nothing to do with the cold of the stone beneath her cheek. The severed bond was an open wound, not in her flesh, but in her spirit, and it festered. Every single heartbeat sent fresh waves of agony rippling out from the hollow place in her chest. She had no words for that kind of pain. There are none. No one has ever made a word strong enough. It is the pain of being made, soul and bone, for one single person, and then watching that person choose, in front of the entire world, to tear you out of his life the way a man pulls a weed from his garden. And here is the thing. Even then, even broken on a freezing floor, with her soul split clean down the middle, with the fever climbing and the dark closing in, Wren did not curse him. She did not scream his name into the dark. She did not beg the night for vengeance. She did not let the bitterness in, no matter how wide it hammered at the door. She lay very still. She breathed, and she held on to the one small light her mother had left inside her, the light the collar had never been able to reach. A person is not made small by the smallness of how she is treated. She said it to herself. over and over and over, like the only prayer she had left, until the fever finally pulled her down into the dark. Above ground, the dawn came gray and came wrong. Alaric was woken not by the morning light, but by a fist hammering against his chamber door. It was Bram, his beta, a warrior who had stood at his shoulder through a dozen brutal winters, and never once, in all that time, shown a flicker of fear. He was afraid now. His face was the gray of cold ash. His eyes were wide and white at the edges. He had forgotten every formal word he had ever learned. Alaric, he said, not my lord, not Alpha, only the name. You have to come. The fields. You have to come now, right now. They rode out into the freezing dawn, and what Alaric found there made no sense to any law of the living world. The fields. The vast and fertile fields that the whole alliance had been built to win. The fat, dark earth he had traded his soul to bring into his house. The very reason he had looked at the only good thing the moon ever offered him and called her a witch and thrown her into chains. They were dead. Overnight, acre upon acre of green winter wheat, whole sleeping orchards, mile upon mile of good rich soil, gone, blackened, rotted down into a thick, reeking sludge that steamed faintly in the cold morning air. The stench rolled over them in a wave, not the clean, sharp smell of frost, the smell of decay, of brimstone, of something gone wrong all the way down to the root of the world. It is not only the crops, Bram said very quietly. He lifted a shaking hand toward the tree line. The river runs black, thick with silt. The fish are coming up dead by the hundred, floating belly to the sky. And the game, the deer, the elk, every living thing that walked these woods, they fled in the night, all of them. The forest is empty. He swallowed hard. And there is more. Alaric did not want to hear it. Say it. The breeding females, Bram said. 3 of them, all carrying, all due to whelp in the spring. His voice nearly gave out beneath him. They lost the pups in the night. Everyone. Stillborn. The healers say it was as though the life was simply called back out of them, as if something reached in and took it. Alaric stood in the dead and stinking field, and he reached for his wolf. It was the oldest instinct he owned. In every crisis, in every darkness of his life, he had always reached inward for the beast, for its ancient knowing, for the part of himself that understood things the cold mind never could. He reached, and there was nothing there, only the cold, only the void, only the great echoing empty house where a wolf used to live and breathe and stand guard over his soul. Something settled into the pit of his stomach. It was not quite fear, not yet. But it was learning, very quickly, how to become it. The days that came after taught him exactly what the moon had decided. The curse did not strike like a blade. It would have been a mercy if it had. A clean blow, a clear enemy. A thing a warrior could draw his sword against and fight. It was not a blade. It was a poison. Slow, patient, complete. The food stores began to rot long before their time. Grain that should have lasted the whole winter turned gray and sour in the sacks within days. The great cavalry of Vale Hold, the lichen warriors who had been feared across the entire reaches, found their wolves growing slow and sick inside them. The shift came hard now. It came with pain. Some mornings, For some of them, it did not come at all. And through the cold halls of the fortress, the whispers began. Quiet at first, then everywhere. A cursed alpha, a blighted house, a goddess who had turned her face away and would not turn it back. Sloane noticed none of it. She swept through the rotting fortress in her fine silks, demanding feasts the dwindling stores could no longer provide. She paraded her new title past servants who would not lift their eyes to look at her. She had finally gotten what she wanted. She was not about to look too closely at what it had cost. She did not yet know the cost was coming for her too. But Alaric saw it. He saw all of it. He walked the dead fields and the black, silted river and the cold stables full of trembling, sickening wolves. And slowly, terribly, the understanding came down over him like a stone laid on a grave. He had traded his fated mate for fertility, for wealth, for power. And now he had none of the three. The fields were dead. The wealth was rotting in its sacks. The power was draining out of his pack like blood from a wound that would not close. One gray evening he went out alone to the edge of the blackened field. The bruised moon was rising over the dead earth, the same sick purple it had worn on his wedding night. And the first truth landed on him, the first of many, each one heavier than the last. This was the land. This was the very thing he had sworn was worth it. The harvest, the grain, the cold, clean arithmetic that had let him look into a pair of storm-gray eyes and call them witchcraft and turn them away. He had told himself she was the price of saving his people, and the land he had paid that monstrous price for was rotting to black sludge beneath his boots. He sank down at the edge of the dead field. He pressed his bare hand flat against the cold, poisoned earth, the earth he had betrayed his own soul to own. And for the first time since the ash room, Alaric Vale felt something stir in the hollow place where his wolf had been. It was not hope. It was far, far too late for hope. It was the slow, dawning horror of a man who is only now beginning to understand the true and terrible size of what he has done. Down in the dark beneath his feet, the girl in the iron collar burned with fever and held on to her small light and did not curse him. And high above the rotting fortress, the bruised and patient moon looked down upon the wound she had been made to suffer. And it began, very quietly, in the deep cold of that night, to move. The fever should have killed her. It burned through the long nights in the lower cell, and there was no one to bring water, no one to cool the stone, no one to mark whether the girl in the iron collar lived or died. That was the thing about being thrown away. No one comes to check. Ren drifted in and out of the dark. The wound where the bond had been torn out still bled, somewhere underneath her skin, in a place no healer could ever reach. Every breath dragged across it. She was so tired. A part of her, a small and weary part, wanted to simply let go, to set down the heavy thing that living had become, and rest. And then, at the deepest hour of the night, the dark in her cell began to change. It came as light first, a soft silver glow, seeping through the cracks in the old stone, pooling on the floor like spilled moonlight given weight and substance. And with it came a scent, not the damp and the rot of the cell, something else, night flowers in bloom, cold, clean rain, The green sweetness of growing things in a place where nothing should grow. The light gathered in the center of the room, and it was warm. There was no towering figure, no goddess come down in thunder to seize the moment and make it her own. There was only a presence, quiet, vast, patient as the turning of the seasons, folding itself down small, so as not to frighten a dying girl on a cold floor. A voice moved through Ren's mind. It did not command. It did not boom. It was low, and it was kind, and it carried a grief so old and so deep that it made her own grief feel suddenly less lonely. "Child of the earth," the voice said, "look at what they have done to you." Warm fingers, made of light, touched the iron collar at her throat. The metal hissed. It cracked, and then it crumbled away entirely into a fine gray dust that sifted down onto the stone and was gone. Ren gasped. The agony in her chest, the festering wound where the bond had been, suddenly went cool. Not healed, not erased, but held, cradled. The way a mother holds a hurt that she cannot take away. And into the cool place, something else began to pour. It was power, but not the kind she had imagined power to be. It was not a weapon handed to her. It was not a sword pressed into her fist, ready to cut. It was something already hers, something that had always been there, sleeping in the marrow of her, waiting. The voice did not put it into her. The voice simply woke it. "The strength is already in you, child," the voice said softly. "It was always in you. I am only the one who remembers it on your behalf. What you do with it now, that is not mine to choose. That has only ever belonged to you." And then the light drew back. It did not vanish in a blaze. It receded gently, the way the tide pulls back from the shore, leaving the sand changed. The cell was dark again, but the girl in it was not the same. Ren sat up. The fever was gone. The cold did not touch her. She looked down at her wrists where the iron had worn her raw for weeks. The skin there was whole, smooth, unmarked. She held her hands up in the faint light, and they did not shake. For the first time in her entire life, Ren was not afraid. She was still in a cell. The door was still locked. By every law of that fortress, she was still a slave, still a prisoner, still nothing. And yet, something enormous had shifted, somewhere down in the foundation of her. She did not feel like a weapon. She felt like a door that had finally been thrown open onto a country she had always known was there, and never been allowed to enter. She sat in the dark, and she breathed the cool, clean air, and she began, very quietly, to decide who she wanted to be. Far above her, in the warm and rotting heart of the fortress, another decision was being made for someone else. Sloane had taken ill, cramping, a deep and bone-cold sickness that no fire could chase out of her. She summoned the healers, certain in her vanity of what they would tell her, that she was carrying, that an heir was coming, that her place was secure at last. The high healer was an old and nearly blind woman who had served the house since before Alaric was born. She had seen things behind the veil of the world that most wolves never even believed in. She laid her thin hands flat over Sloane's belly, and she pulled them back as though she had pressed them to ice. "Speak, old woman," Sloane snapped, her voice gone shrill with the first true fear she had felt in weeks. "Am I with child? Am I carrying the heir of Valehold?" The old healer turned her clouded eyes toward the corner of the room, toward Alaric, who stood there in silence, gaunt and gray as a ghost of himself. "My lady," the healer said. Her voice was very gentle and very final. "There is no child." A pause. "And there will not be one. Not from this union. The womb is." She searched for a word that would not be cruel and found none. "It is barren. Cursed. It feels as though winter itself has settled inside her and frozen the life out of the very ground. House Vale will bear no heir from this marriage. Not now. Not ever." Sloane screamed. She hurled a silver cup at the old woman's head and shrieked that she was a liar, a fool, an incompetent crone. She tore at her own hair and collapsed onto the bed in a fit of pure hysteria. Alaric did not move. He stood in the corner of that opulent, freezing room, and he watched the second wall of his carefully built empire come down. He had traded his fated mate for an alliance, and the alliance had given him dead fields. He had traded her, in part, for the future, for heirs, for a bloodline that would carry his house forward through the centuries. And the future, too, was barren now, frozen, salted, gone. This was the second truth. It landed on him heavy and certain and undeniable. Another loss carved out of the man he used to think he was. Everything he had betrayed his own soul to win was rotting in his hands, and he was beginning, only beginning, to suspect why. The wolf had not truly died at the wedding. It had only gone silent, curled deep in the dark of him, turned away, unreachable. But a liken's strength and swift healing flow from the bond between the man and the beast. And with that bond severed, Alaric had begun to wither like a tree half cut at the root. He was not yet mortal. He was something worse. A wolf who could no longer reach his own wolf. A half-life, neither strong nor free. His broad frame had thinned. His hair had lost its luster. His pale eyes had sunk into dark hollows, bloodshot and haunted. He did not sleep. When he closed his eyes, phantom teeth tore at a bond that no longer existed, and he woke gasping, clawing at his own chest. And one night, driven by a hunger he could not name and did not understand, his feet carried him down the cold spiral stair, down past the guttering torches, down into the deep, wet dark of the lower cells. To her. He told himself he expected to find a corpse, a girl thrown into a freezing cell, starved, fevered, forgotten. Of course she would be dead. Weeks had passed. No one had brought her food. No one had brought her water. He told himself he was only going to confirm it, but even that was not the truth, and some buried part of him knew it. He had grown skilled this last season at telling himself stories. It was nearly the only thing he had left. He reached the iron bars of her cell, and he stopped. The cell was not dark. A soft silver light filled it, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. And in the center of it sat Wren, still in the coarse gray burlap, still where they had thrown her, but changed. Her skin, once pale and starved and gray, now glowed with a soft pearl warmth, as though lit gently from within. Her dark hair fell in clean, heavy waves down her back. The hollows of hunger were gone from her cheeks. She looked up at him, and it stopped his breath in his throat. Her eyes. They were no longer the storm gray he remembered, the bruised sky color that had haunted his every waking hour. They glowed now, a fierce, luminous, living silver, like two small moons set into her face, and there was nothing in them that he had braced himself for. No fear, no begging, no hatred, not even the heartbreak he had earned 100 times over. There was only this, a deep, calm, terrible pity. The bond crisis hit him all at once. He reached for it without meaning to, for the thread that had run between them, for the pull, the heat, the ancient recognition that had nearly brought him to his knees in an ash room. He reached, and where the bond had been, there was a scar, sealed, closed, final. He could not feel her anymore. The one thing his ruined soul still wanted, more than air, more than his lost wolf, more than his own life. And it was gone, because he himself had torn it out. And yet, the wanting remained. It was the cruelest thing of all. The bond was dead, but the love it had woken in him was not. It roared up in him, looking at her glowing in the dark, looking at how the cell had become a throne room around her without her ever standing up. He gripped the cold iron bars until his knuckles went white. The heat between them was unbearable. It had no thread to run along anymore, and so it simply burned, with nowhere to go. "What are you?" he breathed. The arrogance was gone from his voice, stripped clean away. What was left was raw and afraid, and almost a plea. Wren rose to her feet. The shadows in the cell seemed to draw back from her, the way the dark draws back from a candle. "I am the mistake you cannot undo," she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried a strange second resonance beneath it, low and vast, as though something far older were speaking gently alongside her. "You looked at the gift the moon laid at your feet," she went on, "and you called it a curse. You chained it in iron and threw it into the ash." She took a step toward the bars. He did not step back. He could not. "So she let you keep your crown, Alaric. That was always all you wanted. The crown. And now the crown is rotting on your head." He stared at her, at the silver in her eyes, at the woman she had become in the dark of a cell he had sent her to. Everything in his withered body screamed at him to break the lock, to go to her, to fall down at her feet and confess every shameful thing and beg her to undo what could never be undone. He did none of it. He had thrown away the right to any of it the night he sank his teeth into the wrong woman's throat. "The winter is coming for your house," Wren said quietly. "It is already inside the walls, and this time—" She paused. "This time, you have no fire left to keep yourself warm." Alaric stumbled back from the bars. He turned, and for the first time in his life, the alpha of Veilhold fled. From a girl in chains, from the truth in a pair of silver eyes, up the stairs and into the cold, the sound of her soft and pitying voice following him the whole way. But the night was not finished with the lower cells. Sloane came down some hours later, wrapped in heavy velvet, a single guard dismissed with a hiss, a small glass vial clutched in her pale hand, nightshade, enough to stop a beating heart in 3 slow minutes. In her ruined and twisting mind, the blame for all of it, the dead fields, the barren womb, the rot eating her new kingdom, sat squarely on the girl rotting in the dungeon below. A weed, she told herself, cannot be reasoned with. It must be pulled out by the root and burned. She expected to find her half-sister huddled in the dark, shivering, defeated, easy. Instead, the cell glowed with a soft, impossible light, and Ren stood at the center of it, in a garment that was no longer gray burlap, but something the moonlight had bleached to a clean and startling white. She did not stand like a slave. She stood like a queen, holding court in a kingdom that had not yet been built. "You," Sloane hissed. Her voice shook with terror and venom in equal measure. "You are doing this. You are cursing my body. You are rotting the ground beneath our feet." Ren turned to face her, slowly. The silver light in her eyes stripped Sloane bare, peeled back the beauty, the silks, the title, and showed the small, frightened, rotten thing crouched at the center of her. "I am doing nothing, Sloane," Ren said. And it was true. "The earth rejects you because you took what was never yours. The soil knows only the truth. You built your whole kingdom on a foundation of stolen things. It was always going to fall." "Be silent," Sloane shrieked. She fumbled the stolen key into the lock, threw the door wide, and lunged into the cell with the vial held out before her. Drink it and die, so that my husband can finally look at me without seeing your ghost in the corner of every room." She thrust the poison toward Ren's face, and here is the moment that mattered. Not because of what the goddess did, because of what Ren chose. The power rose in her in an instant. She felt it surge up from the marrow, silver and wild and immense, more than enough to do anything she wished. She could have stopped Sloane's heart where she stood. The poison was right there. It would have been so simple, so deserved. The woman who had handed her chains, who had made her sew the gown, who had come down into the dark with murder in a glass bottle. For one long heartbeat, Ren held all of that in her hands. And then she let it go. She did not kill her. She chose not to. A pulse of cold silver energy burst outward from her chest. Not a blade, not a death. A wall. A simple, absolute refusal. It struck Sloane and lifted her clean off her feet, hurled her backward through the open door, and slammed her against the far wall of the corridor. The vial shattered on the stone. The dark poison hissed and ate into the mortar where it fell, harming no one. Sloane lay crumpled and gasping, staring up in pure animal terror as Ren stepped, calm and unhurried, out of the cell that could no longer hold her. "You came here to take a life?" Ren said softly. "I am letting you keep yours, not for your sake, for mine. I will not become the thing that was done to me." She walked past the shaking woman without another glance. Down the corridor she went, and the torches flared blinding bright, and then went dark behind her, until the only light left was the soft silver that followed her every step like a faithful thing. High above, in his cold chamber, Alaric Vale felt it. Not the bond. The bond was dead. He felt the foundation of his world shift, one final, grinding inch. He had lost the land. He had lost the air. He had lost his wolf, and his strength, and the future of his name. And down in the dark he had built for her, the girl he had thrown away was rising. Not as a weapon, as something far more frightening than that. As a woman who had been handed the power to destroy him, and had looked at it, and chosen, instead, to be free. Ren walked out of the fortress on her own 2 feet. No one stopped her. The guards on the lower stair dropped to their knees as she passed. Their inner wolves whimpered and bowed low, cowed by something they could not name and would not dare to defy. She did not look at them. She did not need to. She simply walked. Up out of the dark, through the cold and rotting halls, toward the great doors of Vale Hold. Each step she took fell quiet and certain on the stone, as if the fortress itself had decided to let her go. And when she pushed those heavy doors open and stepped out into the blighted courtyard, the world answered her. Her bare feet touched the dead black grass, and a shock wave of living green pulsed outward from where she stood. The frost melted into shining dew. The poisoned earth heaved and shuddered, and then, all at once, it bloomed. Wild jasmine, winter lilies, small white flowers she had no name for, breaking up through the rot in a spreading ring, opening their pale faces to the moon, as if they had been down there the whole time, waiting, as if all the dead ground had ever needed was for her to come back up out of the dark and call them home. Pack members stumbled out into the courtyard, woken by something they felt deep in the marrow. They saw the bastard servant girl, the thrall who had worn the iron collar, the thing the Lord had thrown into the ash and forgotten. They saw her standing barefoot in a ring of impossible flowers, lit softly from within, the dead earth coming alive beneath her feet. And they fell to their knees in the melting frost. Wren did not stop. She did not climb the dais. She did not turn to the kneeling wolves and demand their loyalty, the way the man inside those walls would have. She did not so much as glance back at the black towers of the house that had broken her. She walked through the open gates, and she disappeared into the deep, ancient dark of the forest, leaving a trail of blooming flowers behind her in the snow. The forest took her in like something that had been keeping a place for her all along. Deep in its heart stood the ruin of an old stone chapel, half swallowed by ivy, forgotten by everyone who had ever lived. The roof had fallen in long ago, and the doors hung crooked on their rusted hinges, and the wind moved through it like a held breath. It was not much, but it was the first place in her entire life that no one had given to her, and that no one could take away. It was hers. And around it, slowly, the forest began to change. While Vale Hold lay buried beneath suffocating snow and ice, the woods around the old chapel woke into a strange and gentle warmth. The frost drew back from the clearing. The river ran clear and cold and clean again. The deer and the elk that had fled the whole territory came drifting back between the trees, unafraid, as if they too had heard that something good had finally come to live here. It was as though a small piece of spring had taken root in the dead of winter, and it refused to be moved. The first wolf came within days, a young one, sick and shaking, his fur gone dull. The shift turned painful and wrong inside him from the curse on his old home. He had followed the scent of jasmine through miles of frozen woods, half dead on his feet, hoping for something he could not have named. Wren met him at the broken doors. She knelt, and she laid her glowing hands against his fevered side, and the sickness simply left him, drained out of him like water sinking into dry ground. He looked up at her with wet and astonished eyes, and he did not leave. After him came others, a trickle at first, then a steady growing stream. Wolves slipped away from Vale Hold in the dead of night, in twos and threes, then in whole families. with their pups and their elders, and their few small bundled belongings. They did not run off into the wild to form rogue packs. They came to her. They followed the scent of wild jasmine through the frozen dark, and they found warmth and clean water and a healing that asked for nothing in return. She did not make them swear to her. She did not put a collar on a single soul, not after everything a collar had done. They came because they wanted to come. They stayed for the very same reason. And slowly, without ever once demanding it, Wren found herself standing at the quiet center of something that looked a great deal like a home. But here's the part the old stories never tell you. Power does not arrive clean. It comes with a question fastened to it. And the question is not, what can you do? The question is, what will you do? Because there came a night, deep in that first hard winter, when Wren sat alone in the ruined chapel, with the wolves sleeping all around her in the warm dark, and felt the full and terrible weight of what she had become. The wolves were coming to her now, by the hundreds. She could feel them if she reached out into the dark. Every one of them. They would follow her anywhere. They would fight for her, die for her. The moment she so much as asked, she had the power to call the very earth up out of the ground. She had felt it move beneath her feet. And not far away, in a cold and rotting fortress, sat the two people who had taken everything from her. The man who had chained her, and lied about her, and thrown her into the ash. The sister who had come down into the dark with murder in a glass bottle. It would be so easy. That was the thought that came to her in the small cold hours, and it frightened her more than the curse ever had. To raise the wolves who loved her, to march on Vale Hold through the snow, to pull those black towers down, stone by stone, with the living roots of the earth, to stand over Alaric and Sloane the way they had once stood over her, and let them feel, just once, what it was to be small and helpless and thrown away like something worthless. The pain wanted it. The wound where the bond had been, the scar that would never fully close, it wanted blood. It whispered to her, low and reasonable, that blood was only justice, that they had earned every cruelty she could pour out on them, that no soul in the whole wide world would ever blame her for it. And the worst of it was this. The pain was not entirely wrong. They had earned it. Wren sat with that for a long time. She did not beg the goddess to decide it for her. She had learned, down in the dark of the cell, that the choice had only ever belonged to her. That was the gift and the burden, both at once. So she took both roads up in her hands, and she looked at them honestly, the way you can only look at a thing in the deepest, most private part of the night. One road was the blade. It was satisfaction. It was vengeance. It was the cold, sweet justice of standing tall on the ruin of everyone who had ruined her. And at the end of that road, she understood, she would have become the exact thing they had always sworn she was: a witch, a weapon, a danger to be feared and hunted and put back in chains. She would win, and she would lose herself completely in the winning. The other road was harder. The other road was to take all that power, all that fury, all that rightful and burning grief, and build something with it instead. She thought of her mother, of the small, steady light that had been handed down to her long ago, in the worst of all places. The words that had carried her through everything. A person is not made small by the smallness of how she is treated. She had carried that light through the ash, through the chains, through the severing, and the fever, and the cold cell where they had left her to die. It was the only thing they had never managed to take from her, and she understood, sitting alone in that ruined chapel, that if she picked up the blade now, she would be setting that light down at last, for good, with her own 2 hands. So she made her choice, not because she was a saint, not because the cruelty did not deserve an answer. She chose the harder road because it was the only road that let her keep herself. By morning, the choice was made, and it was final. She would not call herself Alpha. She would not raise an army. She would not march on a single soul. She would build a place where the broken could come and be made whole again. A door that opened instead of a fist that closed. She would take her voice back, but she would take it back with her own dignity intact and not with someone else's blood on her hands. And so the legend grew. Out there in the woods, the silver woman of the old chapel, the one who turned no one away, the one who healed with a touch and asked for nothing. The true heart of the territory was no longer the man wearing the crown in the cold stone hall. It was the woman wearing the moonlight, out in the warm and blooming dark. Alaric felt every wolf that left him. He sat on his black throne in the freezing hall, wrapped in heavy furs that no longer warmed his withering body, and he listened to Bram bring him the count. 300 more gone in the night, the beta said, very low. The hunting families, half the old guard. Even the elders are loading their wagons now. He hesitated. They say the goddess has left this place. They say the true Luna holds court in the forest. And Alaric. His voice dropped further still. They are not wrong. Any of us can feel it if we stand still long enough. Alaric closed his eyes. The void where his wolf had been felt heavier in that moment than the whole weight of the stone fortress pressing down above him. He thought of the silver in her eyes, down in that cell, the pity, the dreadful calm of a woman who no longer needed one single thing from him. He had done this. Every wolf walking out through his gates was walking, step by step, toward the very thing he had thrown away. Let them go, he said. His voice was a ruin of the commanding thunder it had once been. I have no right to stop them. I never had any right to any of it. That was the third truth. One by one, they fell away. The land, the air, and now, the pack. Each loss stripped off another layer of the man he had once believed himself to be, until he could barely find what was left underneath. He had betrayed his own soul to hold power over others, and now, quietly, without anger, without a fight, the others were simply choosing to leave. He did not chase a single one of them. For the first time in his long life, Alaric Vale understood that some things, once thrown away, do not come back, and that the fault was his alone, all the way down to the root. But Sloane would not surrender. She had lost her beauty to the curse, her future to the barren cold, her husband to a silence he had wrapped around himself like a burial shroud. The pack despised her. The elders whispered openly now of casting her out into the snow. She had nothing left but her rage, and the last of her father's gold. And rage, she discovered, could still buy a great many things. From the shadows of the antechamber, she had listened to all of it. And where the wolves would no longer serve her, she decided she would simply purchase blades that would. She would commit the oldest and foulest treason of her kind. She would bring human swords against her own people. Using the last of the silver hidden away in her chambers, Sloane sent secret word to a band of mercenaries who haunted the far borders. Cruel men, hollow men, men who cared nothing for wolves or curses or goddesses, and everything for the weight of silver in their hands. Their captain was a scarred and joyless man called Maddox. He had put villages to the torch before. He would not lose a moment of sleep over one more. The terms were simple: a fortune in raw silver, safe passage through the whole of the territory, and one task, above all the others: burn the old chapel in the forest to the ground, and bring back the head of the silver-eyed woman who lived inside it. Maddox counted the coin twice. Then he smiled, slow and cold, and he gave his word. On the eve of the deep winter solstice, beneath a thin and bitter moon, a force of armed men marched into the ancient forest, crossbows slung across their backs, steel pikes glinting, torches held high and hissing against the dark. And riding a safe distance behind them, wrapped in the last of her good velvet, came Sloane. Her eyes shone with a fever, bright and manic glee. She watched the line of torches snake between the black trees, deeper and deeper into the woods, and at last she let herself believe it. That she would have her vengeance, that she would take back everything, that the silver-eyed ghost who haunted her marriage would finally be gone. Ahead of them in the warm and blooming clearing, the old chapel glowed softly in the dark. Hundreds of wolves slept peacefully within its broken walls, lulled into safety by the gentle warding of the place. Pups curled against their mothers, elders breathing slow and easy for the first time in a season. And at the heart of it, awake, standing at a glassless window with her silver eyes fixed on the cold tree line, Wren felt them coming. Every torch, every blade, every careful, creeping step. She had chosen the road of healing. And now, in the deep of the solstice night, she was about to learn whether the world would ever let her keep it. The mercenaries reached the edge of the clearing just before the dawn. They came in low and quiet through the black trees, the way men move when they have done this kind of work before and learned to live with it. Crossbows loaded, pikes ready, torches shielded behind cupped hands so the light would not betray them too soon. Ahead of them, the old chapel glowed soft and warm in the dark, and inside it, hundreds of wolves slept on, trusting the deep peace of the place to keep them through the night. Captain Maddox raised his scarred hand. He had been paid a fortune in silver for one simple piece of work, and he meant to earn every coin of it before the sun came up over the trees. He looked at the sleeping sanctuary, at the gentle light in the broken windows, at the warmth that hung over the clearing like a held breath. He felt nothing at all. That was what made him good at his trade. He had burned out the feeling part of himself a long time ago, and he had never once gone looking for it. He gave the signal. His archers touched their arrowheads to the torches. The pitch caught. A row of small, hungry fires bloomed along the dark tree line, orange and eager. "Burn them in their beds," Maddox said, low and flat. The bowstrings snapped. A volley of flaming arrows arced up into the night. Dozens of them, trailing long ribbons of fire, climbing high over the clearing, then tipping at the top of their flight, falling, plunging down toward the dry old timbers of the chapel where the pack lay sleeping. They never landed. A sound rose up to meet them. It was not a war cry. It was not a horn or a shout or a clash of steel. It was a low, resonant hum, a single deep note rising up out of the frozen earth itself, out of the ancient trees, out of the cold dawn air. And the sky above the chapel changed. The air warped and thickened and folded in on itself. A vast dome of pure silver light bloomed into being over the entire clearing, shimmering, alive, humming with that single endless note. The flaming arrows struck it, and they dissolved. Each one broke apart, the very instant it touched the light, into a soft scatter of harmless drifting sparks. They floated down through the dark like fireflies in summer, winking out one by one, long before any of them came near the ground. Maddox's horse reared and screamed beneath him. His men fell back a step, then another. Their hard faces went pale and slack in the silver glow. They were killers. They were not fools. They knew, in their bones, the difference between a fight a man could win and a thing that should not be. And then the crooked timber doors of the old chapel swung slowly open. Wren stepped out into the dawn. But she was not only the girl from the ash room anymore. She had passed through something, somewhere in the long winter, in the choosing and the building and the patient healing of every broken thing that came to her door. The power was no longer something she carried in her hands like a borrowed tool. It had become something she simply was. Her bare feet did not quite touch the grass. The silver light pouring off her was so bright it threw long, sharp shadows out through the trees behind the mercenaries. Her dark hair lifted and drifted around her, stirred by a wind that no one else in the clearing could feel. And her eyes were no longer simply silver. They had become vast, deep. Two small calm moons set into a human face, ancient and patient and terrible in their utter stillness. "You bring iron," she said, "and fire into a place of healing." Her voice did not come only from her mouth. It came from the trees, from the cold wind moving through the branches, from the frozen ground beneath the mercenaries' own boots. It was the voice of 100 protective mothers, layered over with the low and lethal warning of a thing far older than any nation of men. They felt it in their teeth, in the roots of their hair, in the pit of every belly. Behind her, the chapel came awake. Wolves poured out through the open doors, dozens of them, then 100, then more, huge and bristling, their hackles raised, their eyes glowing with a strength that was not entirely their own, ready to tear the invaders limb from limb for daring to bring blades into this place. The mercenaries braced themselves for the charge. But Wren lifted a single hand, and every wolf behind her stopped. They sat back on their haunches, all at once, in perfect, eerie silence. Hundreds of them, held in place not by a chain, not by a barked command, but by their love for her and their trust, and nothing more than that. She would not spend them. She had not built this place healed all these broken creatures, sworn off the road of blood, only to turn around now and feed the ones she had saved into a slaughter. If anyone was going to stand between her people and the steel, it would be her. "Leave," Ren said to the men. "Turn around, walk back out of these woods, and you may keep your lives." It was not a threat. It was a mercy, offered plainly, one last time, to men who had come in the dark to burn children in their sleep. Captain Maddox was too greedy to take it, too proud, and far, far too deep into the night's bloody work to turn back now. He had been paid for a head. He intended still to deliver one. "I do not fear a woman with a pretty light," he spat. He drew his heavy broadsword from across his back. He drove his spurs into his terrified horse, and he charged straight at her across the frozen clearing, the great blade raised high to cut her down where she hovered. Ren did not flinch. She did not raise the dome higher to hide behind it. She did not call her waiting wolves down on him. She did not even lift her hand against him. She simply looked at him, and then she looked past him, down at the cold, dead earth beneath the boots of all his scattered men. The ground erupted. Massive ancient roots, each one thicker than a grown man's body, tore up through the frozen soil like sea serpents breaching the surface of a black ocean. They came up everywhere at once, all along the tree line and across the open ground, faster than the eye could follow. They snapped crossbows like dry kindling. They wrapped armored men around the waist and flung them up into the gray sky, then back down into the dark of the woods, screaming. Maddox's charging horse was caught full across the chest by a thick whipping vine and swept clean off its feet. The captain crashed down hard into the churning mud, the breath driven out of him, his sword spinning away to vanish in the dark grass. Panic took the mercenaries whole. These were men who had stood in the face of steel and fire and the screams of burning villages and never once broken. But they had never faced the earth itself rising up beneath their feet to throw them down. They broke. They dropped their weapons where they stood. They turned and ran, scrambling back through the dark woods, tripping over the very roots that hunted them, clawing at each other in their terror. They left their silver behind them. They left their pride. They left their fallen captain face down in the mud, and they did not look back. And here, in the very heart of all that fury, came the moment that decided everything. Ren stood at the center of the clearing, hovering, blazing, more powerful in that single instant than any living soul in the whole of the territory. The earth was hers. The men were hers to do with as she pleased. She could close her hand. She could let the great roots drag every one of them down beneath the cold ground and hold them there forever. She could crush the captain where he lay groaning and broken in the mud. She could end all of them, every man who had come to burn children in their beds, in the space of a single breath. And no court in any land, beneath any sky, would ever have called it by any name but justice. The power surged up in her, ready, eager almost, hungry to finish what they had started, and Ren held it. She held all of it in the palm of her open hand for one long and trembling moment. She felt the old pain rise with it, the ash, the chains, the severing, the cold cell where they had left her to die, the whole long ledger of everything that had been done to her, all of it whispering that this was right, that this was owed, that she had every reason in the world. And then she let them run. She did not take a single life. Not the captain who had come for her head. Not the men who had set fire to the arrows. She drove them out of her woods with the bones of the earth, and then, at the very height of her power, she opened her hand, and she let them flee into the dark with their lives. She kept her hands clean, not because they deserved it. They did not. Not one of them. She kept them clean because she did. Because she had decided on a cold night in a ruined chapel who she was going to be. And she would not let these men, of all people, be the ones to change her mind. The roots sank slowly back down into the soil. The great silver dome faded, gentle as breath, into the gray of the rising dawn. The clearing went quiet, save for the moan of the wind and the slow, easy breathing of the wolves bowed behind her. Maddox dragged himself up out of the mud, one arm hanging limp and broken at his side, and he ran, blind and stumbling and weeping after his fleeing men. The grand and bloody triumph had lasted less than a minute. Sloane watched all of it from the cover of the tree line. She had ridden in behind her hired blades, certain of her victory, hungry for the sight of her sister burning. She had carried her last gold, and her last hope, and her last cruelty into the woods, to spend them all in one final triumphant night. And now she sat frozen on her horse at the edge of the trees, watching the whole of it dissolve into ruin before her eyes. Her army scattered to the wind, her captain broken in the mud, her vengeance turned to drifting sparks and sinking roots. And at the center of it, glowing like a small, fierce moon brought down to walk the earth, stood the girl she had once handed a chain. Terror finally broke through the wall of Sloane's rage. She wrenched her horse around. She dug her heels in hard, desperate now only to run, to get back to the cold walls of the fortress, to put as many dark miles as she could between herself and the silver-eyed thing her half-sister had become. And a hand closed around her horse's bridle and stopped the animal dead in its tracks. It was Alaric. He had tracked her scent through the snow all the long way from Vale Hold. He had pieced together her treachery far too late, and he had ridden through the freezing dark on a failing horse to reach the woods before the worst of it could be done. He stood now at the edge of the clearing. No armor, no furs of state, only a thin and worn tunic against the bitter cold, his wasted frame shaking, his hollow eyes enormous in his gaunt and ruined face. He did not even glance at his wife. He was looking past her, at the clearing, at the dawn breaking over the warm and blooming ground, at her. For the first time since the day he had turned away from her in the ash room, Alaric Vale saw his fated mate clearly. He saw the magnificent, glowing, almost divine creature she had become. He saw the hundreds of wolves bowed at her back in willing, joyful devotion, the way no wolf had ever bowed to him. He saw the earth itself rise to defend her and then settle, gentle as a sigh, the very moment she chose to let it. He saw all of it, everything he had thrown into the ash to save a harvest, and everything he understood now that he had never once deserved. In the face of all that radiant glory, the last crumbling pillar of his pride simply fell. It did not crack. It did not put up a fight. It collapsed all at once into dust and was gone. And the strangest thing of all was the relief that came rushing in behind it. As if he had been carrying a great stone for his entire life, and had only now, at the very end, been allowed to set it down. He let go of Sloane's bridle. He did not watch her go. He did not call out after her as she shrieked and kicked her horse and galloped away alone into the dark, away toward a fortress that no longer wanted her, toward a father who would bar his gates against his own daughter. He simply let her go. And then Alaric Vale, the once feared alpha of the entire Western Reach, walked into the clearing on his own 2 failing legs. The wolves saw him coming. Low growls rolled through the gathered pack, building, rumbling up out of the earth. The very ones who had once knelt to him, who had once sworn their lives into the palm of his hand, bared their teeth at the sight of him now. He did not stop. He walked straight through the heart of them, unarmed and unafraid, because there was nothing left inside him for fear to take hold of. He walked across the churned and frozen mud, past the scattered weapons of the men who had come to murder her, until he stood 10 paces from where she hovered in her cool silver light. And then his knees gave way beneath him. He did not stumble. He did not collapse. He knelt, on purpose, slowly, deliberately, the way a man kneels only when he has finally run all the way out of every other thing that a man can do. He pressed his bare hands down into the cold black mud, and he bowed his head low before the woman he had once chained in iron and dragged into the dark. The whole clearing went silent. Hundreds of wolves watched, breath held, the wind itself seeming to still, as the man whose arrogance had once rivaled the mountains pressed his forehead down toward the dirt at her feet. His shaking hands rose to his shoulders. He worked loose the heavy clasp that held the ancestral cloak of his house, the black and silver mantle, passed down through his bloodline for longer than even the oldest elders could name. The mark of the Alpha, the weight and the right of the crown. He let it slide from his shoulders, and he let it drop into the mud. Then he drew the heavy signet ring from his finger, the ring of Veilhold, the seal of his power, his name, his ancient right to command the lives of others. He looked at it, once lying there in his open palm, and then he tossed it away into the dark, wet grass, as though it weighed nothing at all, as though it had only ever been a beautiful lie he had spent his whole life carrying. "I have no fortress," Alaric whispered. His voice was the husk of the thunder it had once been. "I am no king. I never should have been." This was the fourth truth, and this one he laid down with his own 2 hands. The land had been taken from him, the air taken, the pack taken quietly, one wolf at a time, until the halls stood empty. But his crown, his pride, the last and the oldest of all the things he had betrayed his very soul to keep, this he gave up freely. He set it down in the cold mud of his own will at the feet of the girl he had thrown away like something worthless. Ren looked down at him. The silver light poured off her, vast and cool, and it fell across the broken kneeling man, and it did not warm him. It only lit, with a terrible and gentle clarity, the ruin he had made of himself, the thin and wasted frame, the trembling hands sunk in the mud, the bowed and humbled head of a man who had once held 1,000 lives in the closing of his fist, A single season ago, the sight of him kneeling would have felt like a dream too sweet to be believed. Now it brought her no triumph at all. It brought her something heavier than triumph, something she had not braced herself for and did not entirely want, a deep, quiet, aching sorrow for the waste of it, for the years and the cruelty and the soul he had thrown into the fire, all of it spent for a crown that now lay sinking slowly into the mud between them. She did not raise him up. She did not reach down and offer him her hand. She let the silence stretch long and longer. The wolves bowed at her back, and the freed silver light still blooming softly through the clearing. "You bow to the soil now, Alaric," she said at last, quietly, without anger and without mercy, in the level voice of a woman who no longer needed anything from the man at her feet. "But the earth remembers the iron you bound me in. It remembers the cell and the cold and the dark you sent me to die in." He did not lift his head. His forehead stayed pressed down toward the dirt. "I do not ask for pardon," he rasped. "I have no right to it, and we both know that. My wolf is dead. My soul is ash. I brought ruin on my own house with my own blind hands, and there is no undoing one moment of it." A long breath dragged in. "I ask only that you protect them, the pack, the ones who stayed behind. They are innocent of what I did. Punish me however you wish, but not them. Never them. They are already safe," Wren said. The flowers at her feet parted gently to let her step back from him. "This place needs no Alpha. It never has. You are a king without a kingdom, Alaric Vale. There is nothing left here for you to rule, and nothing here that fears you." She turned away from him. "Go back to your cold fortress. Sit in the long winter you made for yourself." She did not destroy him. That was the thing none of them understood yet, watching from the edges of the clearing. She had the power. She had the cause. She had every right that anyone in any land could ever have named, and she simply chose not to. She walked back toward the broken chapel, the silver light moving with her like a faithful thing, and she left the ruined man kneeling alone in the mud behind her. But he did not go back to his fortress. He could not. There was nothing left there now but echoes and dust and the ghost of the man he had once believed himself to be. So instead, Alaric crawled to the very edge of the sanctuary, to the place where the warm and blooming woods gave way, all at once, to the bitter, killing cold of the world outside. And there, at the boundary, in the snow, he lay down, and he stayed. The season that followed was a slow and grinding agony. Without his wolf, his body had no defense left against the cold, no swift healing, no ancient strength to draw upon. He suffered everything that a frail mortal man suffers, and he suffered all of it alone. The frost blackened the tips of his fingers. His hands blistered and split open from chopping wood for the small fire he kept burning at the tree line. His ribs showed through his thin tunic. He ate the scraps the hunting parties left behind in the snow. The wolves who had once trembled at the very sound of his voice now walked past him with a profound and total indifference. He was no longer their alpha. He was only the gaunt figure who haunted the borders, a shadow at the edge of the warmth, a thing they had long since stopped seeing at all. He never once complained. Every evening, he sat beside his small solitary fire, and he watched the soft silver glow of Ren moving through the broken windows of the chapel, healing, tending, lifting the broken up out of the dark the way no one had ever lifted her. He loved her now, fiercely, completely, with everything that was left of the small mortal life still flickering in him. But it was a love born entirely of agony, a love that knew with perfect and bottomless certainty that it could never, ever be returned. And he understood that this was exactly as it should be, that he had earned every inch of this distance with his own 2 hands, that the only honest thing left to do was to bear it in silence, without asking her for a single thing in return. He had spent the whole of his proud life measuring the worth of a soul by its blood, by its standing, by the size of the lands it held, and the number of swords it commanded. Out there in the cold, with nothing at all, watching a girl he had once thrown into the ash light up the dark for hundreds of grateful souls, he finally understood how blind he had been. It was the cruelest lesson of his life, and the truest, and he had paid everything he owned to learn it, far too late to do him any good. Then the thaw came at last, and with it, something far worse than any winter. A sickness began to move through the scattered remnants of the old territory. It was no ordinary fever. The oldest texts had a name for it, whispered and half forgotten by all but the eldest. The ash lung, a wasting that turned the very breath to gray dust inside the chest. And it did not strike at random. It struck only those who still carried the old blood oath of House Vale within their veins. The few dozen loyalist families who had stayed behind in the rotting fortress, too proud or too old, or simply too stubborn to leave. The most ancient of the elders, and the newborn pups, the little ones, far too young to have ever made any choice at all about whose side they were born onto. They began to die, their small chests heaving for air that would not come, their lips staining gray with a soot that rose up from nowhere. The last bitter dregs of the curse, draining themselves out of a broken bloodline, and dragging the most innocent down with it. The news reached Alaric on a gray and dripping morning. It was carried by a scout who had run himself nearly to death to bring it, and who collapsed, gasping, at the edge of his small fire, and could barely choke the words out. The children of Valehold were suffocating, dying one after another on the cold stone floor of the very great hall where Alaric had once stood tall in his pride and condemned a kitchen girl to chains. Panic seized his frail human heart. He knew the sanctuary was safe. The sickness could not cross into Ren's warm and warded woods. The children there would be fine. But the children trapped in his old keep were dying. Dying because they carried his name, because of a sin that was his and his alone, and had never had the smallest thing to do with any of them. He did not stop to think it through. He had no weapon, no horse, no wolf, no strength left worth the name, only a frail and failing mortal body, a tunic full of holes, and 50 miles of treacherous, half-thawed mountain pass standing between him and those dying little ones. He pushed himself up onto his bleeding feet, and he ran. It should not have been possible. His boots tore apart before the end of the first day. His feet bled through the rags he wound around them. His lungs burned in the thin, cold air of the high passes until every single breath felt like swallowing a mouthful of broken glass. But somewhere deep inside the hollow place where his wolf had gone silent, he thought, just once, that he heard it again. A phantom howl, faint and far away, and urging him forward through the dark. He did not stop. He fell, and he got back up. He fell again, and he got up again. The parts of the mountain he could no longer walk, he crawled. And when he finally breached the gates of the fortress that had once been the seat of all his power, the stench of death rolled out to meet him like a living thing. The great hall, the very room where he had stood, cold and certain and cruel, and called a frightened, kneeling girl a witch. It had become a place of dying. Dozens of sick pups lay scattered across the cold stone floor, their small chests laboring, their lips gone the color of old ash. The few elders who remained tended them with hollow, hopeless, exhausted eyes. Alaric did not hesitate for even a moment. He gathered as many of the children as his ruined body could possibly carry. He tore down broken shields from the walls and dragged down old hanging tapestries, and he lashed them together with frozen hands into a crude and clumsy sled. He loaded the 5 sickest pups onto it, the 5 with the very least time left to them, and then he turned and bent his raw shoulders into the ropes and began to drag them back over the 50 miles of thawing mountain, back toward the only place left in all the world that could save them. The journey took 3 days. 3 days of hauling that sled through mud and meltwater and sharp loose stone. The ropes cut deeper and deeper into his raw and bleeding shoulders with every mile. He did not sleep. He had almost nothing to eat. His mortal body, with nothing left to give, finally, fully, began to give out beneath him. He did not let go of the ropes. Not once. Not for a single step. By the time he reached the glowing boundary of the sanctuary, he was dying. His body simply had nothing left in it. He fell to his knees in the cold mud at the edge of the warm woods, the sled dragging to a halt behind him, the 5 children on it still just barely breathing. "Help them," he wheezed. His vision had gone dark and narrow at the edges. He lifted one bloody, trembling hand toward the distant chapel. "Take them. Heal them. Let my name die. Let the whole of House Vale be wiped clean from the face of the earth, every last trace of it. I do not care. Just let them breathe, please." The doors of the old chapel opened. Wren came out into the gray light, her silver glow cutting clean through the gloom. And behind her came the elders of the pack, the ones she had healed and sheltered all that long, hard winter. They rushed forward. They lifted the sick children, one by one, from the crude sled, and carried them in through the warded boundary, into the warmth, into the healing air of the sanctuary. And the very moment the little ones crossed the threshold, their breathing eased. The gray soot faded from their small lips. Their chests rose and fell, slow and deep and easy, and one of them, the smallest, even stirred and gave a soft and sleepy whimper. They would live. Every one of them would live. Wren walked, slowly, to where Alaric lay dying in the mud. She knelt down beside him. Her clean and immaculate light fell across his ruined face. Her pristine white garments soaked up the dark mud of the ground, and she did not seem to notice, and she did not seem to care. You brought them back, she said softly. I was paying my debts, he choked out. Blood flecked his cracked lips. There were so many of them. I am only sorry there was not time to carry more. A long, shuddering breath dragged its way into his chest. I am sorry, Ren, for the iron, for the ash, for the chains, for the cell, and the wedding, and all of it. For the crown I chose over you, when you were the only true thing I was ever offered. He let his eyes fall closed, and he waited, almost gratefully, for the dark to finally come and take him. And then, the air around them dropped cold. The soft silver mist gathered and folded in upon itself, and the presence Ren had come to know drew near, not towering, not thundering down in judgment, quiet, as it had always been with her, carrying a grief older than the mountains themselves, gathered close in the gray light of dawn. A life must be given, the voice said gently, into the stillness. The curse demands its balance, child. A sacred bond was shattered. A soul was broken in the breaking of it, to lift the last of the sickness from his people for good, to seal the wound forever. A life must close it. The voice did not command her. It never once had. The choice, the voice said softly, has only ever belonged to you. Ren looked down at the dying man, and here, at the very end of the long road, came the hardest moment of her entire life, harder than the ash, harder than the chains, harder even than the night in the clearing when she had held the power to crush her enemies in her fist and chosen instead to let it go. Because now she held a different kind of power altogether, the power to simply do nothing at all. She could let him die. It would cost her nothing. It would break no rule, stain no hand, demand no act from her. The curse would quietly take the single life it was owed. The children would be wholly saved. And the man who had chained her and lied about her and torn her soul in two before the eyes of the entire pack would simply slip away into the dark that he himself had welcomed. No one in any land would ever call it cruelty. It would be the most natural thing in the whole world. Justice balancing itself. He had even begged her for it. He wanted it. And the old pain rose up inside her one final time. It showed her the cell, the cold iron collar against her throat, the wedding in the falling snow, and the white silk slipping from her bleeding fingers, and the scream that had torn itself out of her chest as her soul split clean in two. It is owed, the pain whispered to her, low and reasonable. Let the world balance its own books. You do not have to lift a single finger. You only have to stand here and wait. Ren waited. She knelt there in the cold mud beside her dying enemy, and she let the silence stretch long and longer, and she truly, honestly weighed it in her hands. She did not pretend the temptation was not there. It was. It was vast, and it was old, and a part of her, a part that had every right to exist, wanted it badly. She held his fragile life in her open hands, the way she had once held the lives of the men in the clearing, and she looked at it for a long, long time, honestly, all the way to the bottom. And then she made her choice. No, Ren said. The word came quiet, but it rang with the full and final authority of everything she had become. She lifted her face to the gathered silver mist. He has suffered enough. He stripped away his pride, his name, his crown. his strength, every last thing he ever held. And then he crawled across 50 miles of mountain on a broken mortal body to carry dying children to safety on his own bleeding back. Her voice did not waver, not once. He put chains on me once, and he has learned, slowly, in the cold, exactly what those chains cost him. I will not put a death on him now, and learn that very same lesson myself. I have come too far to become the thing that was done to me. The presence in the mist tilted, slow, a deep and ancient sorrow moving through it. If he lives, child, the voice said, then the balance must still be paid in full. And so it will take from him the last of what makes him a wolf, his final spark, his long, unnatural life. He will become nothing more than a fragile, mortal man. He will age, he will wither, he will die within a mere handful of seasons, while you will remain for far longer than you can yet begin to imagine. Do it, Alaric whispered. His eyes flew open and found hers, wild now with something that was almost, impossibly, hope. Make me a man. Take the wolf. Take all of it. I never deserved it. I never deserved a single moment of it. Let me be small. Let me be mortal and weak and nothing. Just let me live long enough to see them grow. Ren closed her eyes, and she laid her glowing, warm hands flat against his chest, over the cold and hollow and silent place where his wolf had curled away to sleep all those long months ago. Now understand this clearly, because this is the whole of it. This is the heart of everything. She did not spare him because she was weak. She did not spare him because the cruelty had not mattered, or because she had somehow forgotten it, or because some hidden part of her still secretly longed for the bond that he had torn apart with his own teeth. That bond was gone. She did not want it back. She had built something far better than that bond, out in the warm dark, with her own two hands. She spared him for one reason, and one reason only, because she had finally learned how to see the true worth of a person, not the worth of blood, not of a name or a crown or a fine seat at a high table, but the worth that lives inside a soul, no matter how low that soul has fallen, the quiet, stubborn worth he had been far too proud, his whole blind life, to see in a kitchen girl kneeling in the ash. She could see it now. She could see it even in him. And she would not be the one to look at a living thing and call it worthless, and throw it away. Not even this one. Especially not this one. Because that, in the end, was the whole entire difference between them. He had looked at the most precious thing the world ever offered him, and seen a thing to be discarded. She had been handed the cruelest of men, broken and dying at her feet, and chosen to see a person. A blinding surge of silver light poured out of her hands and down into his chest. The pain of it was enormous. Alaric screamed as the last microscopic traces of the wolf were burned clean out of him, as the ancient magic severed his final tie to the moon, to the pack, to the wild and savage thing he had been born to be. And when the light at last faded away, the presence in the mist was gone. Alaric lay in the mud, gasping, alive. He felt utterly, completely different, cold, achingly fragile, mortal now, all the way down to the very marrow of his bones. The wolf that had only slept through all these long, hollow months was at last truly gone, cut away clean, and the terrible, suffocating void it had left behind, the dark hollow that had haunted his every waking hour, That was gone too. He was empty, and only now, emptied of all of it, was he fully and finally a man. And for the first time since the morning he had turned away from her in the ash room, Alaric Vale was at peace. Ren rose to her feet. She looked down at him, and her vast silver eyes softened, just slightly, just for a moment, for the first time since the day he had thrown her into the dark. "The curse is lifted," she said. "House Vale is ended, and the children will live." "And me?" he asked, in a voice that was now entirely and only human. "What am I now?" "You are just a man," Ren said, gently, without cruelty, and without warmth. "And the gardens here need tending. Someone must care for the jasmine." The seasons turned, and then they turned again, and again, and again, beyond counting. The story of the Silver Woman of the Woods spread far beyond the old broken borders of the territory, into the tales the old ones told by their fires, and the young ones half believed, and the children begged to hear one more time before sleep. Ren watched over the forest, not as a tyrant, not as a queen on a high throne, demanding fear and submission and the bending of every knee. She watched over it the way a true guardian does, the way the moon watches over the tide, with a steady, patient, endless, watchful care. The pack thrived. They were free, at long last, of the petty wars of crowns and bloodlines and stolen, hoarded things. No soul wore a collar in those woods. No soul ever would again, as long as she kept her watch. The sick came, and they were healed. The lost came, and they were given a home and a warm fire. And the thrown away came, the ones the wider world had looked at and called worthless. They came, and they learned, slowly, gently, season by season, that they had never been worthless at all. That had always been the lie. And every single morning, until his dark hair turned stark white and his mortal bones at last grew old and weary and gave out, an aging man could be seen at the edge of the old chapel. He swept the worn stone steps. He carried the water. He knelt in the soft, dark earth and tended the wild jasmine that grew up thick and sweet around the broken walls, the very same scent that had once led a proud and ambitious alpha down into a cold ash room to the only good and true thing the moon had ever laid at his feet. He never spoke of his past as a king. She never once reminded him of his cruelty. He watched her from afar, the immortal, glowing woman moving through the warm dark, lifting the broken up into the light. And he carried his love quietly, the whole rest of his small mortal life, the way a man learns at last to carry a heavy stone he has finally made his peace with. It was not the love of a husband. It would never be that. He had thrown that away forever, in the snow, with a stolen vow and a stolen mark. It was the love of a soul that had finally learned what it had once been far too blind to see, and had been given, by a mercy he had never earned, the long, slow gift of an entire lifetime to make his amends. One swept step, one tended flower, one quiet, ordinary, humble morning at a time. And in his last winter, when his hands had grown too weak to tend them any longer, something quiet happened. She began to leave a single white flower on the worn stone step each dawn. She never spoke of it. He never thanked her, but he understood. It was not forgiveness. It was something quieter than that, and in its own way, larger. It was the simple act of being at the very last seen. In the end, the iron collar was broken and never once replaced. The crown was set down in the mud and never picked back up. And the two souls the moon had once tried so hard to join together found instead a different kind of ending altogether. A quieter one, a stranger one, and in its own way, a truer one than the old stories ever promise. Not a goddess and her fated mate, but a guardian of the deep woods, eternal and unbroken, and finally, fully at peace. And the humble mortal man who lived out every last one of his remaining days, gladly, with nothing left in all the world to his name, except the keeping of her gardens. And the small white flowers bloomed on, season after season after season, in the warm and gentle dark where no living soul is ever thrown away. Because a person is not made small by the smallness of how she is treated, she had always known that. Even in the ash, even in the chains, it was the one light they could never reach. And in the end, so, at last, did he.